Good evening, everyone. My name is John Green, and I'm the director of the Ignatian Volunteer Corps in Philadelphia and South Jersey. Welcome to the webinar tonight. I'm glad you could be with us. We have kind of an exciting night planned that I'm calling Frida Berrigan Part 2, which we can get into in a minute. And I can talk a little bit about IVC when we're getting closer to the end of the webinar. But I wanted to start us off with a story tonight because our year has been about storytelling in the IVC program. And I have one to share that kind of brings us to where we are tonight. Back in 1997, when I was 25 and living in Portland, Maine, 2 years out of my commitment as a Jesuit volunteer, there was a group of us that decided to drive down to New York City for Easter weekend, because there's an organization called Pax Christi in New York City, and they do a Living Stations of the Cross on Good Friday. So we drove down, we were very excited. We slept on the floor of an old rectory in the Bronx, and a group of us got up on Friday morning and joined with Pax Christi. The Living Stations of the Cross matches Stations of the Cross with different places in New York City, where they talk about some places that do wonderful things for human beings and the environment, and they point out some other places that might participate in some injustice of some sort, economically, toward the environment, those sorts of things. We were very fired up. The last station ended at the Intrepid in New York. And the Pax Christi folks were telling us about the glorification of war machines and that are responsible for the destruction of human life and all those things. And in the middle of this, a van pulled up and a group of people got out, and a murmur went through the crowd that one of the people in the van was Daniel Berrigan. And we were all sort of starstruck. And we watched as they committed an act of civil disobedience and crossed the line at the Intrepid. And we were invited to come with them, and we were panicked because we did not know what that meant. And all these things went through our mind as they were getting arrested. You know, where would we be taken? How long would we be gone? What would happen to my car? What would happen for dinner? And so we stood back and watched. And about an hour later, we were ushered into a room, and they were going to talk to us about what happened. And in walks Daniel Berrigan and his group. And we were relieved that they were released, but we were also really disappointed and frustrated that we didn't cross the line and didn't know if we would have an opportunity to do that again. So today, I stand before you on Zoom as a 52-year-old who can say that I still have never been arrested. And I'm sure on some level that makes my parents proud, but there's a part of me that would invite arrest for standing up for my beliefs, standing up for injustice. Would my parents be proud of me for that? I'm not sure, but I am pretty sure that our guest tonight knows what that feels like, to stand in strength and truth and have her family be proud and not count the cost. So it's my great honor to introduce our guest tonight, Frida Berrigan. And you're on mute. There you are. Welcome.
Hello, everybody. Thank you. Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, it's great. And it's long overdue. We missed you in May. We took a moment that evening to send you good thoughts and will toward health, but I know you fumbled along for a little while there. So you're doing okay?
Yes, I'm doing great. Yeah, that was a terrible stomach bug and fever and awful. And it hung on for actually a couple of weeks, but just ran a half marathon last weekend, and I'm feeling pretty good. So,
well, running a half marathon, that's a sign that you're on the right track. So that's
right. And I'm glad to be with all of you this evening. And thanks so much, John, for setting this up. And much easier to communicate with you all from my house in Connecticut than come down, although it would be nice to be in person.
Well, someday we'll think about that.
Yeah.
The story that I told, I was just thinking this. So that was 1997. I think you were in New York at that point, but I don't know whether you were in college or living at Maryknoll, or maybe you were there that day and I just didn't know who you were. So.
Right. Well, no, in 1997, I was still in college, but I have vivid memories of the Pax Christi Stations of the Cross, and many years. When I lived in New York City, I lived there from 1999 to 2010. And so, over those 10, 11 years, that was my Friday before Easter discipline. And whoa, it's a long walk. And sometimes it's freezing cold or pouring rain. Sometimes it's quite hot, depending on when Easter falls. And that last station of the cross at the Intrepid, which I'm sure most folks on the Zoom know, is this massive warship, on the edge of Manhattan there. It's a museum to war making. Is the place to get arrested on Good Friday. And sometimes it's really, 4 or 5 people. I don't know how many it was in 97. And sometimes it's 20, 25 people. And I think that had shifted over the years, depending on, whether there was an active war that everybody was fired up about, like, the U.S. invasion of Iraq in 2003 and 4 and 5. We had, maybe 24 people getting arrested as a part of that. But Dan would do it pretty much every year up until, let's see, he passed away in 2016. So, he definitely didn't do that walk that Easter in 2016, but I think 2015, 2014, up until, he was no longer really able to walk. He was present there. I think he always felt like you couldn't really celebrate Easter without experiencing those stations of the cross and standing there with brothers and sisters, many from the Catholic Worker in New York City, and going through that simple but consequential and scary, always scary, active civil resistance.
Yeah, it was powerful. I mean, it stayed with me, and that's why I opened with it. So one thing that I wanted to talk about. So May 9th, Brad was there, Brad Wolf, who edited A Ministry of Risk, the writings from your dad, Phil. He did a great job. And I think we sold somewhere between 30 or 40 books. And I've read the book, and it's heavy. It's a serious read. Like, that is not a beach read. But it's powerful and really meaningful. But I've heard you talk, and you've shared with me some stories, and there's a side of your dad that you share that is a dad. Like, he was somebody who had a softer side, and he was fun, and so, like, could you talk about that a little bit? Because I think that would be fun to hear about.
Yeah. Thank you. He really he was, and there are little threads of it in Ministry of Risk, mostly when he talks about me and my brother and my sister, and about our mom, Liz McAlister, his wife. But it really is it's a very serious book, and before we started, John, I noticed you're wearing a cardigan, and my dad had this great green wool cardigan with these big leather buttons. And my Aunt Carol Berrigan, who is married to my dad's older brother Jerry, had given him this as a Christmas present, and it was made in Ireland. And it was just like this heavy, beautiful sweater, and he wore it all winter. And he often wore suspenders because he didn't really, he needed that extra help holding his pants up. And so he cut quite a figure in this. He'd wear some sort of protest T-shirt, right, or T-shirt with a slogan on it, and then this quite beautiful cardigan, and then dungarees that were he made his living. He supported the Jonah House community as a house painter. They all did. That's what my mother and father and the whole community painted houses. Um, and he would always wear a wool cap, and he would kind of cock it forward. His hair was always very short, and he was clean shaven. He went white quite early, but he was also he was I was born in 1974. He was born in 1923, so he was 51 when I was born. I have a younger brother who's my Irish twin. We're a year and 2 weeks apart. And then we have a sister who was born in 1981. So by the time she came along, he was in his his late 50s. Yes, and so so he had this beautiful head of white hair, and he would wear a hat, a stocking cap, kind of cocked forward. And he was just he was funny and very physical, bear hugs and roughhousing and tickle fits, and he enjoyed people, right? Like if he had met you, John, he would grab your shoulders and he would really kind of look deep into your eyes, and he would want to know something about you right away, right? He would ask about your parents. He would ask about your like what you want to be when you grow up. He would want to know, what was the meaning of your life? And he would really listen. He would sort of drink it in with every person he met. And people who only met him once or twice would feel not just that they knew him, but that they were well known, by Phil Berrigan.
Yeah.
He was a wonderful correspondent, and one of the great gifts of the last 22 years since he's passed away, because he died in 2002, has been as friends of his pass away or do the Swedish death cleanse and get rid of all their things. They pass on letters that Phil wrote them that they had kept. And so he corresponded widely. He spent hours a day sitting at his desk writing letters to people. He had a Rolodex of thousands of addresses of people that he kept connected with. He never learned how to work on a computer. When something was quite important, he would type on a manual typewriter, and he was quite adroit with the typewriter, but it never kind of transferred to the computer. So I guess I'm mentioning the letters because they continue to he continues to really live in these pieces of paper that people share with me, but then all the letters that we wrote, that he wrote to me about my life. And that only happened because he was in jail and in prison so much, right? That if we had had sort of a normal father-daughter relationship unmediated by the carceral system, I wouldn't have so much evidence of physical evidence of his love for me and his deep engagement with what I cared about and what I was preoccupied at a particular moment in time. So I can, I don't have my letters to him, but I can read his letters to me and be like, oh yeah, that's when I was taking this like Protestant theology class in college and was just like, what is going on? Like, what I don't understand. I thought I knew some stuff, and this is all, who's Karl Barth and who's this person? Anyway, so we were in dialogue in these letters that were weekly, at least. And so anyway, I guess maybe the one other thing I'll say about him is he loved jokes and would say, give us a joke. You know, like one of us or one of our circle or his brothers would tell these ridiculous jokes that that really aren't funny to anybody who doesn't know, like the difference between a Jesuit and a Franciscan and a Dominican, or you know, the various charisms of the different Catholic orders. You know, I guess a lot of them made fun of the, you know, the Jesuits being sort of fancy and stuff like that. So so he would love these jokes, and he didn't tell them very well, like, but he received them very, very well. And we had all this shorthand as a family. I won't tell any of the jokes because lots of them are off color, but one was just about you know, a prison. There was a, you know, a joke book that went around a prison complex, and everybody knew all the jokes so well that they no longer had to tell the jokes. They would just tell the number of the joke, you know, so and it would be quiet in the night in the cell block, and somebody would shout out 23 and like eat their bars, so funny, so funny. And so there'd be silence for a little while, and somebody else would be like, how about 14? laughing. And then it would be quiet, and somebody else piped up and said, number 9. Crickets. Nobody laughed. Nobody thought it was funny. And somebody was like, it's all about the delivery. And so we would, you know, we wouldn't say the whole joke, but occasionally, you know, one of us would just be like, it's all about the delivery, huh? You know,
well, isn't it strange that the person who's not very good at telling jokes is the one usually laughing the hardest? So
he had this great laugh, and it would just kind of take over his whole face, and yeah.
So there was one other person I wanted to give a shout out to, my friend Sharon Browning. And when we were doing the event in May, I asked her if she wanted to come and talk about her book. And she is the co-author of a book called The Little Book of Listening, Listening as a Radical Act of Love, Justice, Healing, and Transformation. And the other authors are Donna Duffy, Fred Magandu, John Moore, and Patricia Way. And so I called Sharon and I was like, you're coming to talk about your book. Do you think you could talk a little longer? And she was like, do you think I could talk a little longer? Liz McAlister and I were pregnant at the same time. They lived in our house in Norristown. And so after Brad talked about the book, Sharon got up and like really sort of drilled deep on this very personal, communal living, shared experience that was really wonderful to hear. But she also, I'm not going to do it justice, but she provided an angle on what it was like for women at that time, when men and women were both out there protesting, but women were carrying a really different load for that. And they were pregnant at the time. So
yeah,
I don't know if you remember any of that. She said she thought you were 5, but if your sister was born in 81, you might have been a little bit older, but
yeah. So if it was Morristown, so it would have been the first Plowshares action, which took place in King of Prussia, Pennsylvania, on September 9th, 1980, and involved 8 Catholic peace activists, including Phil and my uncle Dan, and a Catholic sister, Anne Montgomery, and Father Carl Cabot, who was an oblate priest, and Molly Rush and Dean Hammer and John Schuchart and Dean Hammer. I'm forgetting one, and Elmer Moss. So that was the Plowshares 8, and then they had their trial in April of 1981. And so I would have turned 7 during the trial. And I imagine that if it was kind of an extended living situation at Sharon's house, it would have been during the trial of the Plowshares 8. So I would have been 7, my sister 6, and mom was pregnant with our little sister Kate at the time. She was born in November of that year. And so and I think that I can only imagine what my mom was going through at the time. She was born in 1939, so she was not just pregnant and with a 6 and a 7-year-old, but pregnant kind of by accident. And at the, I think she was feeling kind of poorly, thinking she was going through menopause, came back from the doctor and was like, wait, what? Gonna have another baby? And dad was looking at, like, who knows how much time in prison for this, and going to trial with 7 other people, only one of whom had Molly Rush was a mother, I think, of 8 children, but they were all grown up and by then, and so really feeling like she was going to be holding the support for Phil in prison, us 2 little kids, and then with a newborn in a couple months. And so I can imagine Sharon and Liz kind of having some dark, some late night connecting over that, and it being a source of comfort to Liz, to be able to be pregnant and vulnerable with that, with another woman at that time. As it happened, I think Phil was sentenced to, I think he was sentenced to 3 years in jail and ended up serving maybe a year and a half. And so that was kind of the course of that. So we were starting school kind of in that time. My brother and I began school as first graders. So that year, 1980, we would have just been starting school. And because we both knew how to read already, we were just kind of put in first grade together and sort of treated like twins, even though we were a year apart.
Till like 7th grade, right?
First grade.
First grade, but like you stayed in the same grade until like closer to 7th grade or something.
Yep. And then my brother was finally, my mom arranged for him to be put back a year because the Baltimore school system was magnet and his grades weren't good enough, and he was kind of showing the immaturity, of actually being a year too young for the grade he was in. He was really kind of up for it, but kind of socially and emotionally, he really benefited from another year of at what at the time was elementary school, is 8th grade. But yeah, we were together all through that. We were shoulder to shoulder from first grade all the way through middle school. But yeah, beginning school with dad's action hanging over us, and then going through that trial with mom being pregnant. So I don't have particular memories of Sharon's house or where we stayed. Nothing kind of stands out there from just kind of this, like, I think this emerging awareness at that time of, like, our lives are not like the lives of other kids. We were interacting with school kids, neighborhood kids, for the first time out of our peace activist, communal living kind of bubble, and then having this very odd experience of a sort of vacation in a way, right? We were out of school for an extended period of time. And that was fun. But we were also, going to court, and
Yeah.
sort of experiencing this kind of high theater that the Plowshares 8 brought into the courtroom, this kind of high morality play that they were trying to present to the judge and to the jury, that was audacious and infuriating to the judge and to the prosecutor, and kind of terrifying to us. So we weren't always in the courtroom, but it was always sort of it was in the background of or the foreground, or
Yeah. So it was made me think of this when you were talking about your brother, and I remembered you being together until seventh grade. I thought it was 10 years. You said 9, but anniversary of your book. It runs in the family on being raised by radicals and growing into rebellious motherhood. It's a great book. I read it before we had things scheduled in May. The story that stands out for me, and I'm fairly certain you talk about it in the book, and I didn't hear you talk about it in person somewhere, but is the story about the balloon artist and the kids wanting to have swords, and you were like, no, they're magic wands, or that, like, I think you tell that story in the book.
Yeah.
And someone very close to me tries not to say kill 2 birds with 1 stone, but feed 2 birds with 1 crust. And so that, like, commitment to nonviolence, we can think about that in terms of war, and we hear about gun violence in the city all the time, but like it really kind of drills down to what are the messages you're giving your kids, and how do you talk about these things, and what are their toys? And
yes, yeah, and our culture kind of weaponizes childhood, like at a very, very young age, weaponizes childhood and genders childhood, like almost immediately. And in raising all 3 of my kids, I have a 17-year-old stepkid, and a 12-year-old son, a 10-year-old daughter. And Rosina was 4 when my husband and I got married. And the pressure to be like a pretty little girl who doesn't ever get dirty and who wears pink and is always recognizable as a girl, was very strong on my stepdaughter. And then like this kind of to signal immediately that Seamus, who was born in 2012, was a boy, and Madeline, who was born in 2014, was a girl, was just resisting that even a little bit, and allowing all 3 of them to wear what was comfortable, to wear the whole palette of colors, to have hairstyles that were easy to keep clean and easy to keep well ordered, felt as radical as forbidding them from playing with guns, or reverting to violence in their play as little kids, hitting and pulling, scratching. I remember like some birthday present that Seamus got, and sitting with it and being like, okay, and these guns, I'm taking all of these guns, and we're not playing with guns. Guns are they're not toys, and coming down very strong on Rosina about things that were turned into knives, and kind of stabbing play and all of that. But the episode that you reference was, we would have these birthday parties for Seamus, and of course you could hire a balloon artist, this extraordinary woman, but it was hundreds of dollars. And so I got a book, and I was like, I can make balloon animals. This isn't hard. And I was sort of a one-trick pony, and I could make flowers, and I could make dogs. I could make like dogs that kind of looked like horses. And but the kids like wanted to sword fight, and so they were unpopping my work, like kind of unraveling my work to turn things into swords. And I like was like, no, you guys, you can't do that. These are magic wands. And you can zing at one another, but you may not hit each other, and it was like sort of useless. And the balloons all ended up popping and scaring the children anyway. But my husband Patrick had been involved as a very young kid in no war toys campaigns through the War Resisters League. And so we're both like very sensitized to the way in which, the myth of redemptive violence, as Walter Wink talks about, is presented even to very young children, and wanting to kind of create some insulation for our children and for their friends, where they don't have to, where killing isn't part of the play. And so, and as they get older, we can't control as much, or filter as much what they experience and what they see, but we hope that those early lessons sort of stick. And those early lessons certainly stuck for me when I was a kid, and I hope that without traumatizing them or just hectoring them all the time, that those are sticky lessons, because they're really important. And I guess maybe I'll say about that is, I think we, as adults, and consumers of news, and as like American citizens, that kind of just that kind of helpless, well, like, but what's the alternative? Like, what's the alternative to the Israeli Defense Force responding to Hamas's violence with indiscriminate bombing? There's no alternative to that. There's no alternative to the Russian invasion than Ukrainian, conscription and mounting a full-on war. And that idea that there's no alternative, it starts at 16 months. It starts at a year and a half. And so by the time we're adults, we fully like absorb that, like, to do something, to make an impact, something has to blow up, and someone has to bleed. And so, that old adage that war is a failure of the imagination, it starts very, very young. And so our imaginations and our sense of possibility is really blinkered by the time we're adults, and we're just kind of like, yes, I guess that's all we can do. I guess that's all we can do.
And hearing what you're saying, and also like thinking about my own experience, I feel like what they do is they turn it into an instinct. And this notion that we can take a minute, and maybe we don't know what alternatives are, but we won't know unless we take a step back, and we give that time, and we give that space, and we think through things, and we contemplate, and we discern what our choices are. But instant reaction and response doesn't leave any room for that. And we get further and further away from that in our society, right?
That's right. Yeah. And so that Dan Berrigan's assertion, don't just do something, stand there, becomes very salient, right? Like that pause that you're speaking of, allows room for everything, for the Holy Spirit, for imagination, for complex problem solving, for negotiation, for compromise, God forbid, and a third way. So yeah, don't just do it and stand there. It's anti-American, but very, very wise.
I hadn't heard that one. I'm
Yeah.
gonna use that.
Yeah, good.
I'm gonna take a little turn here, or turn, or a right or a left, whatever you want to call it. But I was thinking about this. So in IVC, our members make a commitment to service, and they also make a commitment to some extent to community. They form a community with one another where they come together once a month and they process their experiences and they explore their spirituality and relationship to God. They become members of the community where they're serving. And then the service can be a variety of different things. Like a director's role is to find nonprofits, schools, churches that could benefit from our members being there in some capacity, whether they use their professional background experience or their experience raising families. But one thing I was sitting with and thinking about with you, and this is not going to be well formed, so stay with me. Service in retirement, like our members are over the age of 50, but typically they find us in their mid 60s, is a choice. And to choose to serve, there's like a privilege that comes along with that you have reached a point in your life where you have that ability. And so many people make that choice out of the goodness of their hearts. But when I think about you being born into an environment of service, if that's even fair to say, I wonder what the difference is when you grow up in that, rather than, like, I think about myself, and I followed a certain trajectory into my career, and think about when I have more time doing more service. But I feel like you were born into that. Like it was bred in you to have that be your day-to-day throughout your life. And so that's not fair for me to define that for you. But what do you think the difference is in choosing that later versus like living that in your day-to-day?
Yeah.
That was a tough one.
Yeah. Well, I think well, I guess this is how I'll start to answer it. I was born at Jonah House, 1933 Park Avenue in Baltimore. And it was like this real skinny row house. In the time that we lived there, we always rented. Our rent was very affordable. And Jonah House Informing made a decision not to be dependent on donations. And that was where the house painting came in, that they never wanted to. I live on a very loud street, I apologize. They never wanted to be dependent on donations, because then you sort of, you have to kind of pitch yourself to the vagaries, I guess, of what, your donors will tolerate, right? And so there was a desire to be self-sufficient, and a common purse, right? So everybody who moved in, they all drew from that very modest pot for whatever they needed. And as far as I knew, nobody ever had health insurance, dental, or any sort of really safety net, right? Like people were just kind of there, and the life was very rigorous and very austere. And then this knock would come at the door, pretty much any time, day or night. And it would be one of our neighbors. It would be Miss Audrey from across the street. It would be this young adult Michael. It would be this guy named Sam. It would be Mr. Jones. And they would need like $3 for cigarettes, or they would need milk, or they would want to know if we had any tinned fish, or, you know, like whatever. People were just kind of coming and asking for things. And like whoever answered the door would pretty much give it to them, right? Like whatever it was. And then at a certain point, the community decided that it was really disruptive to have this knock come any old time, you know, any old time of the day, and quite late into the night. And so that we should have a certain time and give out food to whoever like was there, but only like on Tuesdays. And so community members stopped working, painting houses on Tuesday, and we would go to this food terminal, this big kind of warehouse with train tracks coming in and tractor trailers coming in, and we would take all their like half-rotten food and dive through the dumpsters and go around to all the different places and climb under the train and pick up, you know, the case of oranges that fell off the back of the truck and all that. And we would do that really early in the morning on Tuesdays. And we were racing the pig farmers, because the pig farmers would come at like 7 in the morning, and they would take everything that was left. And so we got there at 6 so that we had first dibs, you know, on the stuff. And in the summertime, it smelled terrible. In the wintertime, it was very, very cold and unpleasant. But as a little kid, like, I loved doing this, in part because I got to ride in the back of the truck on the way to Jessup, was what it was called. And then we would come back, and there'd be 100 people like lined up down our block. And there's no sign out. There was no like number system. There was no checking IDs or, you know, you came yesterday, or, you know, like they were our neighbors. Like, we knew every one of them by name, and just like gave it all away, and took like a case and a half for our own use. And it was like not any better than the stuff that we were giving out. And that's what we ate. And so at that time, you know, the way that the community talked about it was like, this is the dark face of empire, right? Like, this is the other side of the coin, right? When we spend so much money on the military, and we have all these nuclear weapons, and we're pursuing all these, you know, wars, covert and otherwise, around the world, you know, the people who live down the street from us don't have enough to eat. Like, they can't feed their families. And there's all this waste, right? Like, there's all this waste built into our food system. And so all this stuff that's not perfect is thrown away. And so this gleaning and this dumpster diving was kind of framed as this like kind of this small like strike against the empire, right? And now we would think about it as, you know, kind of addressing food security by diverting waste, food waste, and, you know, there are whole organizations and agencies that are built around, you know, like a much more like shiny and careful like version of what we were doing in the, you know, late 70s and throughout the 1980s. And so but it really was kind of like they were really fused together. The service to our neighbors and the meeting of the needs of our neighbors was also the meeting of our needs, was also, you know, a way of ameliorating the wounds of empire and the wounds of militarism. So it was all like really kind of tight together. And I think I never really lost that analysis, right? And which was like kind of a very young, you know, analysis, and it never got much more official than that, right? Until quite late in Jonah House's career, when in order to get, like, we couldn't get stuff from Jessup Terminal anymore. We had to go to the food bank, and to be at the food bank, you had to be connected to a nonprofit, and you had to have the temperatures measured in your refrigerators, and like check people off and submit everybody.
It becomes higher barrier.
It becomes a higher barrier, and that's just kind of the way all of this like works, right? But I, when I lived in New York City and had a job at a think tank working on military issues from a much more kind of analytical and academic kind of frame, I had this itch all the time, right? And this call to the Catholic worker, and this call to the War Resisters League, and this desire to not just know stuff and have well-informed opinions about things, but to really kind of be practicing all the time. And so I guess I think about service as sort of practicing like my notions or my intellect or my values.
Right.
Like the way I interact with my neighbors, here in New London, and the way I serve is a practicing of my values. And it's, imperfect and always sort of, like always somehow like refracted through like the privilege that I have, and like my whiteness, and all of that, and like the various comforts that I take for granted, and still just feels like practice, and so and I think that can happen at any age, and be so important and so life-giving to everybody, to the server and the served, and so I guess that's how I run with.
I was having a conversation with a neighbor who was asking me what I do, and I was telling them about IVC, and they were like, "Oh, I don't do anything like that now, maybe someday." And I was like, "Actually, you do something pretty similar." "Well, what do you mean?" So the only reason why I know you is because when we walk the dogs, you always say hello and you stop and talk to me. Like, that counts. You don't need to do that. You could have earbuds in and plow right past me. I barely pay attention to your dog. Like, so.
Right.
One thing I was also thinking about, so we did this retreat at the end of the year, and a lot of our members, most of them, had talked about wanting to hear more about, think more about, practice together prayer. And we had talked about different kinds of prayer. Jesuits talk about contemplative prayer, and there's the exercises and all this stuff. But there's so many different ways to do that. And as a kid who was brought up Catholic, and my parents are going to get mad when I say this, I think I got through 1st through 12th grade and never heard of your dad, your mom, or your uncle until I went into JVC. Hey, I'm born again. It's fine. But prayer to me was like Hail Mary, Our Father. Like, what did they tell you to do after confession? And it's grown into be something very different for me now. And so I wonder what that is for you. And then like the second part of that is, do you ever talk to some of the people who have passed on?
Mm-hmm.
And is that prayer?
Yeah, thanks for both of those questions. So during the pandemic, I was living, with my husband, our 3 kids, my sister and her partner, and our mom, who was diagnosed with major cognitive decline and dementia in 2019. And so we started a Lectio Divina circle, really to kind of anchor her in her, with her community, which was sort of far flung and couldn't be physically present. And and we did it every day from 9 to 10 in those marvelous days in the pandemic where you just, you could devote hours and hours
Yep.
to homebound pursuits. And so Lectio Divina, as I'm sure most people are aware, is just the readings of the day, the Catholic readings of the day. And then we would go around in a circle and we would each highlight a phrase or a verse that spoke to us. And the first time around, we would just say that verse. And the second time around, we would share why that verse spoke to us, what it kind of meant to us in that moment. And after we had all shared, we would do prayers of the faithful, and those would, they kind of turned into gossip sessions, where and I pray for so-and-so who's really struggling right now, and I happen to know all about it, and I'm telling all of you. But no, we would pray very deeply for, and we were deeply present to what each of the circle was going through at that time. And kids were struggling with addiction, and one woman's son lost a baby, and another was their son was in jail, right? Like things were just really happening for everybody in the circle, and we were able to be very, very present. And then we would end with the Lord's Prayer, and sometimes we would end up doing a decade or two of the Rosary too. And I really, on some level, I was just there to kind of operate the machinery for my mom, right? And but, oh, John, I needed that prayer so much, and that discipline of, sure, maybe in the back of my mind, I'm always sort of saying the Lord's Prayer, but like, am I,
Yeah.
and so, but that act of gathering, with other people and saying it out loud and being moved to tears by our sacred texts, and bringing them alive into 2020, 2021, and 2022 was profound for me. And so I continue to do that. My mom's now living in a nursing home just a couple miles from here. I see her just about every day, and my sister, who lives just down the street from me here, sees her pretty much every day too. And what I do with her is I do the readings of the day, and then invite her to prayers of the faithful. And she'll often say, well, I can't think of anybody in particular in need of prayer. So I'll just offer a general prayer. And I'll say, oh, general prayer, like, yes, thank you. Like, we all need it, right?
That gets everybody.
That hits us all, right? I was like, thank you so much. And then I'll say, we pray for people in prison. We pray for people who are sick. We pray for people living under war. We pray for the war makers, right? Like, and she'll be like, thank you, thank you, thank you. And, my 25-year-old self, like, here's some of this, and like, it's like, oh, I'm so uncomfortable, right? Like, I remember kind of how deeply embodied like my parents' faith was, right? And how I was just like, gosh, I'm never gonna get there, like to kind of pray in front of the Pentagon, or pray in front of the White House, or make an act of resistance like a liturgy, right? And so, but it's like, I'm still the person who was uncomfortable with that profession of faith. And I'm here, like, in the lounge of the nursing home, surrounded by other people, just kind of going for it, and allowing myself to be deeply moved, and for the Spirit really to enter this space between words, that I'm sharing with this woman who was a phenomenal intellect, right? Like, and a deeply, deeply educated Catholic, right? And as that, that facility and that erudition, and that like Walter Wayne, Walter Brueggemann, Chet Myers, Jacques Ellul, like all the people that she read so completely, Joan Chittister and Rosemary Radford Reuther, right? And all of that's like kind of fallen away. But the gospel story, and the poetry out of the Hebrew scriptures is still like so deeply embedded, and so I'm in awe of that and deeply grateful, right? Because it gives us a language to continue to share words, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
So I, kind of an answer to your second question, if I'm not going on too long, is, so I feel like I'm in dialogue with, my 65-year-old mother, right? In those times, I feel like I'm welcoming my dad into those spaces. I feel like I'm welcoming Sister Ann Montgomery and my Uncle Dan and my dad's older brothers, and all sorts of dear ones
Yeah.
into that circle as well. And as she kind of like moves into this liminal space, where the veil is sort of thin, I'm able to like venture there too, not because like I want to step through the veil, but because I'm sort of like hungry for, what those people would be, saying to me in this moment. And so, I try and listen very carefully, when I'm there, because I feel like, you know, she's, she's, she's straddling these spaces and able to talk to him, able to talk to my dad a little bit. So there's a dialogue, and I'm not quite, my radio isn't quite tuned there, but I'm attentive to the static, I guess.
Yeah. Yeah. I was thinking about what they talk about with parents and children, that they refer to differentiation, when a child starts to realize that they're their own person and they can do different things, and they might have different, and they start to separate a little bit. And I kind of remember a similar process for me one time in church, realizing that just because I'm there doesn't mean the person to my left or my right is having the same experience as me. And that's okay. Because before that, I thought, oh, this means I'm signing on to this club and I don't know if I can be here. But once I like kind of differentiated from it, I could make it what I needed to be for myself. So I got one more question for you. And I'm going to call it a fantasy question. And it was a long time before I figured out the word fantasy could mean lots of different things. So I guess I mean dreaming and wondering about the future. But as you are getting closer to, I guess, being an empty nester at some point, like, what do you see for yourself then?
Yeah. I'm probably not thinking about that very much yet, but John, just like taking your invitation, I sometimes imagine, like turning our like big house over to another family, and building a little tiny house in our backyard, and living much more lightly, traveling a lot. I spent time in Central America as a young adult, and haven't been back, and would love to, kind of really, maybe not, I couldn't root myself somewhere else necessarily, but I could see myself spending a year in Solotename in Nicaragua, where Ernesto Cardenal, built this like beautiful lay community, and gleaned the Gospels of Sola Siname at Lake Nicaragua. It's totally beautiful and imperiled, I'm sure, by global warming and corporate agriculture. And it's not an oasis from the world, but that's a little fantasy. Yeah, I'll do that.
I'll take it. I'd sign up for that.
Yeah.
So I just want to thank you again for taking this time. It's been wonderful. And just to tell everybody who's on, if you're interested in IVC and want to learn more, you can go to our website, which is ivcusa.org. And pretty much anywhere you click can get you to someone who can let you know more about us. But if you go to Philadelphia, South Jersey, you'll find me, and I'm happy to shepherd you where you need to be. And Frida, it's been a pleasure. One other thing, just for people to keep in mind, our friend Joan in IVC asked for prayers for an intention. And so people can put that on their list. And thank you again.
It was a wonderful conversation. Thank you, John. Thank you, everybody.
You too. And we'll talk again.
Yes.
See ya.
Bye.